The Grifter's Bible, a novel by El Shaboons, read by El Shaboons, with sound design by Monumental Sonic Architecture. Chapter 12. Everyone's got their own bear to cross. The Sanhedrin stoned St. Stephen. Cauchon burned Joan of Arc at the stake. Thomas Edison electrocuted elephants in the streets and told the flabbergasted passersby that the stink was all Tesla's fault. Whether you're a god, a prophet, a CEO, or a king, no one takes to becoming yesterday's news with open arms. No one is pleased to see irrelevance creeping up in the rearview mirror. So if you decide you want to join the circus, get ready to fight some bears. Ding, ding. The house lights went up and Mary got her camera ready to record the fast and furious hours worth of significant introductions and fortuitous meetings that she was about to put together. He's a mighty good leader. She showed Seth off to a steady stream of potential whales and portentous connections as Velvet T's celebrating crowd dispersed towards the exit doors of the Kessler. Y'all are gonna see. Mary's praise for Brother Joe was effusive, and her sales pitch on behalf of his electric light was like a dart full of serum that was impossible to dodge, and inoculating once lodged. I'll get you to come watch him throw down sooner or later. Why not go on and just come get a dose on Sunday? She reasoned. You know I won't do you wrong. As soon as Mary spoke that phrase, Seth would take over and blow them all away with his bluster. I came with the rain and I'm here to roll like thunder. Seth willed the spotlight of their attention in his magnetic direction with the magnitude of his shtick. He closed the deal every single time. Mooning women who barely knew him would kiss his cheek with a swoon. Barrel-chested men would grip his mitt like it was a real honor on their side of the deal. They all turned to face Mary's camera with grins full of teeth as the digital shutter snapped and sealed Steph's myth into their imagination. I was left alone when Seth and Mary were whisked out the door to celebrate with these fish over coffee at a cafe way down the block. Without a phone of my own to call in for reinforcements, it was up to me to outload the gear into the back of Mary's van all by myself. The parking lot was empty of every vehicle but the van. In the significant solitude that stretched out beneath the midnight moon, I kept watching with a wary eye over my shoulder, just waiting for those Roberts brothers to come back and give me trouble. But the only things bruising were my shins. My only major pains came from banging my shoulder on the van door and from dropping a 4x12 cabinet on all 10 of my toes. I was limping and just as alone as I'd ever been by the time I slammed both of the back doors shut on the loaded gear. I sniffed and wiped the sweat off of my upper lip. I hit the ignition. I made it out of the parking lot alive, but man, I was beat. Davis Street was utterly deserted when I pulled out onto the block. The light at Hampton and Davis was long cycling like it was daytime, so I had to sit there even though there were no other cars in sight. I fidgeted in the left-hand turn lane, waiting in the dead of night. I double-checked the mirrors, the lock on my door. I scanned each quadrant of the intersection out of anxiety and boredom. The Petrichor station was lit up like a blinding white shrine trimmed in gloss red aluminum and vacuum-formed acrylic. The night attendant's shoulders were slouching behind the register. The unmanned pumps slumped on their forsaken little islands beneath the 800 mA high-output fluorescent lights. From the Cambios checks catty-cornered to Godfrey's fried chicken, all the other corners were dark and still. No cars on the road. No one would know or care if I just ran the light. I wanted to get back home. I took another look around the intersection and then I lifted my foot off the brake pedal. The northbound light turned yellow. I put my foot back down for another second. My thumbs drummed on the steering wheel and I rolled my eyes as I waited an unreasonable beat for the light to turn red. I finally got my green. I pulled the van onto Hampton, passing Godfrey's on my right as I made the turn. I just barely caught sight of a blackened Cadillac shape sitting out back by the dumpster. There might as well have been nothing there. But when I got about 3 blocks down and checked the van's side mirror, I saw this shadow pull out onto Hampton. At first I thought it was a cop, but they were driving without lights. Maybe I was paranoid, or maybe I was just tired enough to let my mind play tricks on me. Either way, I quickly convinced myself that the headlights were off because the car was following me. I sat up stark straight behind the sweat-slick steering wheel and pressed my foot on the gas. Headlights popped on about a block and a half later and then merged into the far left lane. I gave a little exhale of cautious relief, but only a little. Alone at that time of night, it felt like forever before I made it to the relatively well-lit intersection at Fort Worth Avenue. I watched for traffic in the crossbound lanes, and then I checked all of my mirrors. I saw my tail slink back over into the middle lane about 9 blocks back from the intersection. Then it got into the far right lane, coming up slow behind me. I made my turn and watched the rearview mirror as I shifted up into gear. I didn't see a hint of the black mass for almost a quarter of a mile. But then, as I was passing over I-30, I looked back and saw the silhouette pull up to the intersection at Fort Worth Avenue with its blinker on. It turned east, coming my way. That part of Fort Worth Avenue is a barren and winding boulevard of deserted parts lots, faded sepia motor lodges, and shuttered machine factories from Dallas's clandestine past. Clyde Barrow is buried out there. Others are buried out there as well. Every inch of that stretch looks like the perfect setting for an ambush when you feel like you're being followed. I scrutinized the purple darkness behind me at every drunken bow in the road. I winced a curse after every pregnant pause when the headlights inevitably appeared over another blind hill behind me. It was the same routine for 3 miles of worry, but as I got closer to downtown where Fort Worth Avenue turns into Commerce, the traffic started picking up. 1 o'clock in the morning is still bumping in downtown. By the time I passed Lou Sterrett and went underneath the Stemmons corridor, I was able to wedge my way into the city life until I felt like I'd gotten some obscuring distance between me and the black Cadillac. It began to drizzle and the headlights multiplied into drops on the back windows of the van. I was able to relax inside of the weather. I lost myself under cover of the night. The moon was hooded, but the street sparkled in the LED night. I made every green light going down Commerce back to Deep Ellum. I slowed down and crept along the curb that led up to the darkened church, but then I thought better of parking out front. I eased the van around the corner onto Walton, and then I pulled up to the mouth of the alleyway that ran behind the loft. I made sure it was clear of any cars that I didn't recognize from around the neighborhood. I turned in. I pulled up as far as I could get behind the utility pole that fed electricity to the loft, and then I killed the lights. I shut off the ignition and just sat there in my own nest of shadows. I waited. I pressed on the door lock, checking it again. I scanned the orange field of street lamps dotting the smoky green soup filling up the alley. A long black moss stretched out between each sherbet node. I waited. The windows were covered up in amber raindrops and iced purple fog. I sank back in the driver's seat and sighed. I felt camouflaged with the van in the darkness. I could see almost all the way to where the alley terminated at Good Latimer beneath Central Expressway, but as the engine heat dissipated, the condensation on the windshield spread, killing most of my view. I focused my attention forward through the dwindling field of vision. I listened to the van's engine popping and watched the alley. A pair of headlights turned in down by Malcolm X and I squirmed. The beam splashed in my face from a block away. A cold ghost of ground fog stood in between us. The headlights paused at Malcolm X and lingered behind the Merc. I slouched way down behind the steering wheel. I felt like I was being sized up. After a rolling pause, the lights started moving towards my end of the alley. I worried over whether or not I'd locked the back door of the van before I left the Kessler. Too late now, I reckoned. I wasn't leaving the shadow I was in, so I waited right where I was. I peeked in the rearview mirror, checking for an escape route in case I had to ditch. Like a lightning bolt over my shoulder, white high beams fell on the brick wall opposite the loft. I held my breath. Someone was turning into the alley behind me. The new headlights lit up the fog and the loitering car at the far end of the alley. The first car stopped, reversed back onto Malcolm X, and drove away. I squeaked out a little sigh of relief. I checked the rearview mirror. My butthole cinched up and my stomach lurched. The mean black hood of the Cadillac was inching up next to me. My butt slipped off of the driver's seat. I crouched as far down into the footwell as I could get. I held my breath. I could hear the approaching sound of Eddie Rabbitt singing about windshield wipers and songs on the radio. His voice grew louder and louder as he kept rolling. He was just beginning to lament driving his life away when he was suddenly silenced on the other side of the door. In the wake of the AM radio, I could make out the rattle of shifting gravel and bits of broken glass being crushed down beneath the weight of breaking wheels. I felt pee squeak out of my urethra. The drops dotted the crotch of my khakis. I pinched off the spurt. I bit the inside of my cheek. Behind the eardrum thump of my drumming pulse, I could make out muffled discussion and shifting gears. Then I heard a click like an automatic door lock flicking. Then I heard another louder click like the break of a door hasp giving away. I ground my teeth together as a heavy set of footsteps in the gravel sounded out in the night. I heard huffy syllables spoken, but they might as well have been broadcast through a pillow for all I could make out. I could hear the door alarm dinging away in a race with my heartbeat. A second set of muffled footsteps walked onto the soundtrack. I traced the scribble of shifting gravel until it stopped at the front of the van. For a long time, there was just that door alarm sounding out like a needy pinball machine. The beam of a flashlight pierced the windshield above my head. The lines of the shadows of the equipment in the back sharpened in stark definition. There were purple spots and green flowers filling up my eyes. I let my breath out as quiet as I could. My diaphragm crumpled up like a bellows. My skin prickled like needles were sticking into all of my pores. I heard gravel clicking off the side of the van door. I looked up at the window and saw the bulk of a phantom pass by. I could feel the elephant presence on the other side of the door. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. I listened to the door alarm pounding away. It sounded like a bull kicking the driver's side door. The violent reverberation trembled down my spine and acid shot up the back of my throat. The hard plastic handle of the emergency brake release felt like a gun pressed into the back of my head. I felt like I was going to throw up. The van rocked. Here we go. I waited for them to try the door handle, to bust the window, to jimmy the lock, but they never did.
Come on, we'll get it later.
A hoarse twang beckoned on the other side of the door. There was a grunt in reply. The gravel crunched like cereal beneath a lumbering stampede. 2 doors slammed and squelched the madhouse caterwaul of the door alarm. Then I heard the upshifting transmission. Eddie Rabbit's voice returned before it began trailing off into the distance. I refused to leave the safety of the van. I jumped at even the slightest hint of movement outside. Every garbage truck, every stray cat. But eventually I started coming down off the adrenaline rush. I felt like a balloon deflating, and within minutes I started getting sleepy. I leaned my head against the front of the driver's seat. I nodded off. I waded into black waters filled with 1,000 dreams of teeth. Sharks studded my sleep. A strange and prehistoric dread kept me restless throughout my nervous coma. Knuckles crept up from the deep. Horns and strangling hands reached out to touch me. I jerked awake out of a stone-cold slumber. Wan sunlight was shining on the dashboard. I gathered my wits. I strained my aching neck, looking over my shoulder back to the window above my head. I made out the silhouette of Seth's hair at the door. He kept knocking. Then he looked down.
Oh, there you are.
He spoke from behind the glass.
Open up, glasses.
He jacked with the door handle. I was one tense muscle set in concrete. I moved like a decrepit snail, getting myself out of the footwell. I rolled the window down.
What are you doing in there?
Seth was incredulous, but he was too impatient to let me answer.
Hey, pull this thing around front so we can unload the gear.
Seth snapped his fingers. He was breathing smoke in the cold.
Get it on, glasses. We got places to go.
Where? My eyes adjusted to the light like old people having sex. I wiped out the morning schmutz with a dirty finger. I scanned the alley in the daylight for any sign of the Cadillac.
There's something Mary wants to get from Velveteen's junkyard. A surprise for the church.
We left Deep Ellum at the top of the hour. I listened to the wind blowing through the cracked open window. I watched the freeway for black cars. Mary noticed.
What's eating you, hon?
I didn't say anything about being tailed, but I did ask Mary about Asa and Randy so Seth could hear.
Lord, where to begin?
She shook her head slowly and rude.
10 years is a long time to know them boys, and I heard so many rumors around the office for as long as I've been a volunteer in the Reverend's ministry that I can't even count them all. One thing I can say for certain on my own knowledge is this. Those boys are lower than a snake's belly. And their daddy's got money enough to sweep his family's dirt under a rug. That man spoiled those boys bad, and it hadn't done the world one bit of good.
Mary's arm wove into motion as she put her right hand signal on and got off at southbound exit 77 for Jefferson. Velvet's sister Teeny smiled as she pushed open the beaten corrugated metal gates at the junkyard's entrance. Then she signaled with her long and lacquered fingernails for Mary to come on through. The van crept down a red dirt and black oil path carved out of a canyon of mechanical chaos. The side mirrors barely cleared the crevice between abused cars and aged campers. Mary puttered towards a small loading dock at the front of the warehouse building at the back of the lot. T met us there and took us on a tour. We found a hoarder's paradise of satellite dishes and office equipment piled up in precarious towers of junk. Filing cabinets were stacked on top of desks surrounded by boxes with yellow cat piss stains on every lid. The sweet smell of mothballs and wet cardboard coalesced into a rancid bouquet of funk. It all looked like junk to me, and I couldn't imagine what we were doing there.
Well, that's all I got.
Velvet T started to shine as we reached the back wall of the place.
Oh, no, it isn't,
Mary interrupted as she walked past him towards the back door. She pushed it open and called Seth over to walk outside with her.
Looky here.
Teeny and I followed them, and when we got to the door, I saw Seth with a panoramic grin spread across his face as he posed next to a beat-to-hell old school bus nestled in the scrub and dried-up ant beds at the back of Velvet T's storage yard.
Okay.
Mary's narrow eyes cut back to T.
So the bus is what we'll accept as our fair compensation on the balance of what you owe Brother Joe for the show last night. This?
Velvet T stepped forward and put a hand on the sideboard of the school bus.
This is a whole entire vehicle. Look at all them axles. Ain't no way one night of work is worth all of that.
Seth stepped back from the bus and looked over at T.
Let the Lord strike me down if I try to double deal a brother out of what I'm owed. Maybe the keys to this old war horse are worth more than me running the board for you last night.
He paused like he was weighing the thought.
Maybe, but I still had to do the mix for your DVD.
Seth let that little stink bomb settle between them. The message was unspoken but implicit. Seth wouldn't work on the DVD if T didn't give, and no one but a film buff pays for silent DVDs. T scratched his back on a corner.
Well, look here, I was going to get her tuned up before too long. That's what I was thinking about using to get my show up to livestock. What?
Teeny Walker piped up next to me.
I'm not riding to Dodge in that thing.
Mary pursed her lips at T.
You lie like a dog.
Mary admonished him.
You would have left this thing rusting out here without a second thought if we hadn't gotten a notion and called dibs. You know dang good and well you didn't want it until we come up.
T opened his mouth to protest. Mary stepped right into the gap.
And if you want to keep on playing like this bus and Brother Joe's town don't size up to one another, then how about I start working up a bill for all the equipment we let you borrow last night?
She thought to herself out loud.
Plus, I haven't billed you for crew fees for Brother Nick hauling all that back and forth from our church to yours. And let's talk about the hourly rate for all the time Brother Joe wasted last week sound checking.
The ledger began to teeter.
And what about gas money? You want to settle up on that mileage?
Mary shook her head slowly.
If you ask me how to spell O, I'd say Y-O-U. Charging rates? You're not really going to resort to some low-down-ish like that, are you?
T's head tilted to the side.
May the good Lord strike me down if I don't.
Mary worked her neck with ferocity. Seth blushed like the vicar of Dicker.
Come on. Brothers in faith shouldn't have to get all harsh like that.
But he spread his hands like, what am I supposed to do? T was sinking in quicksand. He turned back to Mary and huffed.
Well, what y'all want that thing for anyway?
Exasperated, Mary clicked her tongue.
Same thing any church want with a perfectly good school bus. We're going to paint it up with their name on it and drive around the neighborhood spreading the good word. Let the people know we're here. Where is here?
T lopped off her comments with his ET fingers.
You ain't driving around my neighborhood giving shout-outs to my customers.
Seth spoke up.
Now, we know the deal. We're not trying to Pied Piper your flock out from under you. You got your territory and I got mine.
He snapped his fingers and pointed at T as he finished.
And never the twain shall meet.
T rolled his eyes and looked over to Teeny for any sort of show of support. She crossed the arms of her purple blazer and just shook her head.
Are you kidding me? The man did something good last night, and that bus has been sitting there for how many years now? You got kudzu and milkweed climbing up the sidewalls like they're ivy. There's potatoes growing off the floorboards. I say if they can get it started and fit it out the door, then it's theirs.
She put her palm up and out, effectively pshawing the discussion to an end. T was outnumbered and he knew it, so he hung his head and put his palms up to show that he was ready to parlay. Mary stepped over and took T's hand down from out of the air. She shook it until Seth sidled up and followed suit. That's how we came by our tour bus. Seth and Mary drove the bus home together. I was alone again when I pulled out of the junkyard in the van. I spotted the black Cadillac immediately. They were waiting outside the bus depot across the freeway as I passed on the service road. The car pulled out plain as the day and made no bones about being marked. I got my happy little ass onto the freeway so I could lose them. I went straight to Deep Ellum, parked out front, and then locked myself inside the church. I still hadn't gotten any decent sleep, so I went to the rat's nest and passed out for the rest of the day. I woke up after dark. I checked through the crack in the window treatment and looked down on the street outside. It was the night before Christmas Eve and all was quiet in the city. The van was gone and I could see the bus parked in its place outside the church. Across the street, a black Buick sat silent like a sleeping bull. I jerked back away from the window. Evil dreams followed me for the rest of the night. Seth organized a street team early on Christmas Eve morning. He tasked everyone with taping paper over the windows on the bus. He had finagled paint out of one of our sheep that owned a paint store. The mark had thrown in brushes, rollers, masks, gloves, and drop cloths to the cause. I put cloth over the tires and taped newspaper around the windshield wiper blades and the mirrors. Seth geared the street team up and then we set them loose. All 30 of them sat on the bus like an army of ants attacking a carcass. With Seth standing back and directing everyone where to concentrate the team's energy, the bus was covered in no time. We took the paper off around lunchtime, then everyone stood back. It was a nice, big, white bus, and Seth was proud. We were all proud, and we stood there shoulder to shoulder, admiring our work as a group. How long does it take for paint to dry? Seth elbowed me in the ribs. On a car? I asked. Bus, he clarified. It'll be a few hours at least before you're able to touch it. I nodded at the bus. He pulled out his phone and flipped it open. He peered down at the screen and shook his head. Seth said, "That's too long," when he looked back up at me. "The wind will speed it up," he thought out loud. What wind? I wondered. He waved his hands out in front of him like he was tossing up leaves and shrugged. "You know, the wind while we're driving around. Come on, everybody!" He held his hands up to his mouth and yelled at the group. "Let's go hollering!" He waved us all forward as he charged across the alley to the bus door. The street team followed his lead, laughing like kids following a fun dad on a new adventure as they piled into the bus and filed past Seth sitting like a captain behind the wheel. "What about all those balloons?" I called over to him. We had 2 full tanks of helium inside because Mary wanted thousands of balloons for our Christmas Eve pageant. Seth scrunched up his nose like he was thinking things over, and then after a second he reached over to the door release. "You're right. Someone's got to stay here." "What's that mean?" I knew what it meant. "It means get to blowing. Dwayne will be by within the hour and he can help you. Fat's showing up around 4:30 if you haven't already finished by then." The last word was clipped off by the snick of the door sliding shut and the engine cranking. Blue exhaust billowed out of the blackened tailpipe, coughing into the cold. The transmission bucked like a cranky dinosaur and the drive shaft yawned out a sound like whale song. The clean white monster started to roll away. The street team waved out at me. Lips Ahoy put his mouth up against the inside of the window and blew. I waved back as they passed going eastward down the alleyway. Seth stopped down the block and stuck his arm out the window. He waved back at me and honked before turning onto Malcolm X. And when they were gone, I said, I spent the rest of the day blowing up balloons. The December sun sets early on the city and twilight comes quick on Christmas Eve. The white bus glowed orange and sounded like a roller coaster full of giggling screams when I saw it race past the open door of the sanctuary. The crew made it back just as I finished blowing up the balloons. The sheep had already begun showing up for the Christmas show, and by 7 the house was full. The house lights went down at 7:30. Oscillating fans at the back of the stage were blowing dry ice fog outwards, dispersing past the knees of the sheep to rise up from between their shoulders. The balloons were batted around like fish eggs in soup. As the body heat in the sanctuary rose up to the ceiling, the helium balloons expanded. The noble gas began to secrete through tiny openings in the knots of each balloon. As the helium escaped, the balloons began to descend in slow motion onto the heads of the flock. Seth walked on stage and the place just exploded. Lightning swallowed the darkness and we kicked into our first song. Seth whooped up his charging army. The flock was squeezed in tighter than the black hole of Calcutta, but somehow they found a way to dance. They looked like pinpoints, bobbing up and down like a box of toothpicks. In a historically chitty year filled with diminishing returns and dwindling possibilities, it had been expected by most that Christmas would be a depressing affair. But it wasn't. Even I could feel it. I was there with all of those people enjoying being part of something. It was a luminous emotion. I had never seen Seth weave his spell with as much skill and bare-chested energy as he did at that Christmas Eve show. He was a battery. He was a dynamo. He was a bull elephant. It was a power, and it had a pulse that made your heart hum until you felt like running up the side of a mountain. The audience was a wall of smiling faces with bouncing balloons and clouds of steam flying over their blissed-out heads. Colored lights coruscated in their shining eyes. No one was passive. They were all flushed with storm. My blisters busted and Fat's fingers bled. Dwayne squeaked with laryngitis by the 2-hour mark. The single respite for breath came when Seth let up off of the gas pedal for a gift-giving ceremony devised by Mary. Seth's hair was smoking from the steam rising off of his head. He started riffing on the spirit of Christmas while Dwayne and I went upstairs to get the care packages for the street team. The house lights went up when I came back downstairs, and that's when I got my first real look at the entire crowd. I stopped a few stairs up from the bottom and scanned back and forth. I took a panoramic sweep of the view before continuing on down the stairs. That's when I saw the bear. As clear as day at the back of the house, Asa Roberts had his cell phone up, lens pointed at the stage. There was a strange look on his face as he filmed Seth speaking about how much the street team meant to him and how it was a person's duty to reach out to the less fortunate angels under heaven. Asa didn't look angry or impatient like he had looked at Velvet T's show. He looked utterly confused, like he was filming the birth of something that was the exact opposite of him. Asa turned his nose up at Seth as little Randy sidled up next to him. They compared something on Randy's phone with the real thing playing out in front of them. I thought back to the little girl that had opened Velvet T's pageant. Mary said that the Roberts brothers were scouting her. Was that what they were doing at our show? Were they scouting for talent? Or were they stirring up trouble?
Let's go, brother.
Dwayne snapped me out of my hypnosis.
Folks are waiting.
I could barely concentrate on the ceremony. My attention was focused solely on the 2 Roberts brothers in the very back of the room. I wanted to tell Billy Goat. I wanted to dispatch him and Beryl to the back of the room, but I felt protected by the bubble that surrounds Seth. Nothing bad was going to happen in there. I watched the 2 brothers as best I could. I stood to the side behind a tower of speakers as Seth led the entire house in a raucous campfire version of He's a Mighty Good Leader. He led the group in round after round, rousing the fury of the flock with every new repetition of the chorus. Mary was throwing out melodic gospel exultations with her powerful throat. Dwayne was hugging each member of the street team as they each took their Christmas gift. I stepped back onto the stage once all the packages were distributed. I got back behind my drum and tried to see Asa and Randy from there. I stood on the tips of my toes, trying to find them out amongst the multitude, but my view was totally obscured.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Fat counted us in. We played Beginning to See the Light and brought the house down.